The waitress took a bullet meant for the Mafia boss. Her charm the size of a thumbnail spun once on its chain, caught the candlelight, and went still against the inside of Rosa Moretti's wrist as she set down the last plate of the night. It was shaped like a tiny music box. Someone had cared enough to hinge a lid onto it, though it never actually opened. And someone had cared enough to give it to her, though she never wore it where he could see her looking at it. The dining room at Casa Fortuna smelled of scorched garlic and candle wax, and underneath that, faintly, of cold marble. The kind of cold that came up through good shoes and told you the building was older than anyone sitting in it. Rosa moved between the tables the way she always did, unhurried, her tray balanced on 4 fingers, refilling water no one had asked her to refill, remembering which of the men at table 6 didn't like ice, and which of the men at table 6 would kill her for pointing that out to a stranger. She didn't know yet that in 11 minutes a man with a rifle case disguised as a garment bag would be standing on the roof of the parking structure across the street. She only knew that the bracelet had slipped loose again, and that she should fix the clasp before it fell off somewhere it couldn't be found, and that the man 3 tables from the kitchen door, the one nobody looked directly at, had not touched his wine in 20 minutes, which meant he was listening to something none of the rest of the room could hear. She reached down to tighten the clasp. What would you have noticed? In that room? In that light? The wine going warm? Or the silence at the one table that mattered? Casa Fortuna did not advertise. It didn't need to. Its reservation book was a scrap of leather that lived in the maitre d's breast pocket, and the names written in it belonged to families that had run this city, in one way or another, for 4 generations. Everyone who worked the floor knew what the restaurant really was. Nobody said it out loud. Saying it out loud was how you stopped working there, in every sense of the phrase. Rosa had waited tables at Casa Fortuna for 6 years, and in that time she had learned the real menu, not the one printed in cream cardstock, but the one written in body language. A man who ordered for his date without asking her preference was a man building an alibi for himself, not romance. A woman who kept her coat on through the entree was not planning to stay past dessert, whatever the men across from her believed. A bag left too carefully under a chair meant you did not, under any circumstances, kick it while sweeping. She carried all of this the way she carried her tray, steady, 2 hands, weight distributed so nothing tipped. She was good at her job before she was anything else to anyone. She could carry 4 entrees up one arm. She remembered 11 regulars' orders without a pad. She knew, without being told, that Table 6's associate liked his espresso poured after the plates were cleared, not before, because he didn't like the smell competing with his cigar. Once, a junior capo snapped his fingers at her from across the room, the way you'd call a dog, and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "Sweetheart, we don't have all night." Rosa smiled, refilled his glass without spilling a drop, and said nothing. She filed it away, not as a wound, but as information. Men who snapped their fingers were rarely the ones who mattered. The ones who mattered didn't need to. At home, 3 miles east in an apartment with a radiator that knocked like a visitor, her sister Mia was doing multiplication tables at the kitchen table and asking, for the 4th time that week, whether Rosa thought doctors got scared before surgery. Rosa always said yes. She said the scared ones were the good ones, because the scared ones checked twice. Tonight, the maitre d' pulled her aside before service and told her, in the flat voice reserved for instructions that were not requests, that Mr. DeLuca's private room needed a server who could keep her mouth shut and her hands steady. She had never met him. She picked up her tray, pushed through the door marked private, and stepped into a room she had heard about for 6 years and never once entered. The private room was smaller than the rumors suggested and colder. Someone kept the thermostat low in here, deliberately, the way you'd keep a wine cellar. 4 men sat around a table that hadn't been set for eating. At the head of it, a man in a charcoal suit was reading a single sheet of paper like it owed him money, a thin scar cutting through his right eyebrow, pale against skin that otherwise didn't give anything away. Rosa didn't know his name yet. She only knew that the room had gone quiet in a way that wasn't about her, a silence that had been there before she walked in, thick as the cold, and that someone needed water, because the man nearest the door kept clearing his throat. She poured. She didn't rush it, didn't spill it. Didn't perform deference the way the other staff did. Backs bent, eyes down. She simply did the job, the way she did it for table 6 or table 16, and when the man with the scar looked up at her, an assessment, quick and complete, the kind he'd clearly given 1,000 rooms before this one, she looked back at him the way she'd look at anyone. Not through him, not around him, at him. "You're new," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've worked here 6 years," she said. "You've just never eaten in this room before tonight." One of the men at the table went very still, the way men do when they expect a woman to be corrected for that. Alessandro De Luca did not correct her. Something in his jaw loosened, almost imperceptibly, like a held breath let out through the nose. It was the flaw in him that did it, the one nobody in this room could see, the belief that had calcified over 15 years, that everyone who got close to him became a target eventually, so the kindest thing he could do for anyone was keep them at arm's length, unnamed, unremembered. He didn't offer his name. He never offered his name to staff. It kept them safe, or so he told himself. But there was a small commotion by the door. A girl of 8, in a school cardigan 2 sizes too big, had slipped past the men out front, looking for the bathroom and finding, instead, the wrong room entirely. She stopped dead when she saw all the suits. Rosa moved before anyone else did, crouching. "Hey, this way, sweetheart." And Mia, who had begged to come along after her babysitter canceled, grabbed Rosa's hand like it was the only solid thing in the building. Alessandro watched the two of them leave. He watched the small hand find the larger one without hesitation, the way you'd watch something you didn't have a name for. He turned to his consigliere. "Find out who she is," he said, quietly. He did not explain why. He never explained why. What would you do if the most dangerous man in the room decided, without a single word to you, that he wasn't going to let you go? It started with small things, which is how it always starts, and how it is easiest to miss. Alessandro began requesting the same section, not her table, her section, so it never looked deliberate, so the maitre d' never had cause to comment. He tipped the way he did business. Precisely, generously, without flourish. He gave every server a Christmas bonus. He gave every driver a paid week off in August. He gave Rosa nothing but his attention, which, had she known how rare that was, how carefully rationed, would have frightened her more than any gun in the building. She noticed the clasp on her bracelet had broken clean through one evening in November, the little silver charm nearly lost under Table 9's chair. She'd had it 3 years, her mother's, one of the only things left after the accident, and she went down on her knees in her server's apron, patting the carpet in the dark, until a hand appeared in front of her holding it. "You dropped this," Alessandro said. He didn't ask what it was. He'd already noticed she touched it when she was thinking, the way some people touch a ring. A week later, a small velvet box arrived at the hostess stand with her name on it, no note. Inside, a new clasp, soldered by someone who clearly did more delicate work than jewelry repair for a living. She never asked how he'd known which jeweler could match the original metal. She wore it that night, low on her wrist, where it wouldn't catch on a tray. She began to see the cost of his life, instead of just its weight. One evening she found him alone in the private room 40 minutes after his men had left, staring at a phone that hadn't rung, a bottle he hadn't opened. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "Wasn't planning to," he said, and didn't move for another 20 minutes. She didn't ask why. She refilled his water and sat, briefly, in the chair across from him, the first person in that room in years who hadn't waited to be told she could. His men noticed her before he admitted anything to himself. One of the drivers began holding the kitchen door for her without being asked. The consigliere, a man who forgot the names of made men within a week of meeting them, remembered hers on the first try and used it every time, like a small courtesy he was proud of affording her. It was around this time that a new face began appearing at the edges of things. A well-dressed man named Lorenzo Bellini, an old associate of Alessandro's father, warm-voiced, quick with a compliment, the kind of man who remembered your birthday and your daughter's name, and asked after both. He brought Rosa a coffee once, unprompted, the week she'd worked a double. "Don't let this place run you into the ground," he told her, smiling. "Somebody should look out for you." She thanked him. She had no reason yet not to. The first wrongness Rosa noticed had no evidence behind it, only a feeling, the kind she'd trained herself over 6 years to trust before she understood it. It was in the way Lorenzo asked questions, small ones. Which entrance Alessandro preferred at the upcoming charity gala. Whether the security detail changed shifts before or after the keynote. He asked them the way you'd ask about someone's allergies. Casual, considerate, easy to answer without thinking. Rosa answered 2 of them before she noticed her own hand had gone still on the tray. She mentioned it to Alessandro that night, careful with her words, because she had no proof, only the shape of a feeling. He's asking about your schedule. The gala. It's specific. Lorenzo's known my family longer than you've been alive, Alessandro said. Not unkind, dismissive. The way people are dismissive of a worry they've already decided isn't real. He's careful. That's why he's still useful. She didn't push it again. She had learned, in 6 years, which fights were worth losing a job over. And this didn't look, yet, like one of them. But something in her had already decided to stay closer to the gala than she needed to. She picked up the shift nobody wanted, the one that put her on the floor for the charity event instead of home with Mia, and it cost her something real. Her sister's school recital, a solo Mia had practiced for 2 months, that Rosa would now miss entirely. She told her sister she was sorry. She did not tell her why she'd taken the shift instead of trading it. She didn't fully know why herself. She only knew she wasn't ready to be somewhere else that night. Alessandro, for his part, did something he had never done in 15 years of running this life. He told his consigliere to double the detail on the east entrance without a specific threat to justify it, purely because a waitress had frowned at a question he hadn't thought twice about. He didn't tell anyone why he'd made the call. He barely admitted it to himself, that her instinct had outweighed his own certainty, and some part of him had listened anyway. 2 nights before the gala, Lorenzo found Rosa alone by the coat check and asked, gently, whether Alessandro would be arriving through the east doors as usual. She said she didn't know. It was the first thing she had ever lied to him about, and it left a small, cold weight in her chest that stayed there the rest of the night. She went home that night and sat in Mia's doorway, listening to her sister breathe, unable to say what she was afraid of, because she didn't have the words for it yet. Only the certainty that something was coming, and that no one who could stop it was listening. Rosa found the truth the way she found everything in that restaurant, by noticing what didn't fit. It was a torn corner of paper, caught in the hinge of the coat check door, blown loose from someone's pocket. A single line of handwriting, a time, a floor number of the parking structure across from the gala hall, and 3 words, confirm east entrance. She recognized the handwriting. She'd watched Lorenzo sign a check with it a dozen times. She didn't run to Alessandro. She stood very still in the coat check room for almost a full minute, turning the paper over, thinking the way she thought when a table needed handling before it became a scene, quietly, several moves ahead. She thought about the questions Lorenzo had asked, about the empire he stood to inherit if the man at its head died in public, in front of every family who mattered, on a night when blame could scatter in a dozen directions. She thought about the recital she'd missed for a feeling she hadn't been able to name, and understood, now, that the feeling had been right the whole time. She went to the security office first, not Alessandro, pulled the guard rotation for the gala, cross-referenced it against the note, found the gap in the east entrance detail that Lorenzo, of all people, had quietly requested 2 days earlier under the cover of coordinating logistics. She wrote down everything. She moved a chair. She did not cry, and she did not freeze, and she did not wait to be told what to do. Later, she would learn, though she never said this part aloud to anyone, that Lorenzo had once been passed over for a seat at the table Alessandro's father built, 20 years earlier, for the crime of loyalty that came a year too late. He had spent 2 decades one step behind men he considered his inferiors in patience. In the one unguarded conversation Rosa overheard between him and an associate that night, his voice cracked, just once, on the words, "I gave that family everything I had, and they gave the throne to a boy who was still in short pants." It was almost a reason. It was not an excuse. She understood, standing in that hallway with the note in her hand, what the silver charm on her wrist had actually been. Not a gift from a man who kept everyone at a distance, but the first thing he'd let himself give without calculating the cost. She understood, too, that everything she'd noticed and said nothing about in part one, the untouched wine, the listening silence, had been the first tremor of exactly this. She put the note in her apron pocket, next to the small silver charm, and went to find Alessandro. She didn't find him in time to warn him quietly. By the time she reached the gala floor, he was already at the east entrance, precisely where the note said he would be, shaking hands with a state senator under chandelier light that made him an easy shape to find from 400 yards. Rosa didn't call his name. She didn't scream a warning that would only tell the shooter she'd seen him. She walked, fast, deliberate, the same unhurried competence she carried a full tray with, straight across the floor, inserted herself into the handshake and said bright and clear, "Mr. DeLuca, they need you by the north stage for the toast," and took his arm like she'd done it 100 times, pulling him 3 full steps toward the pillar before the first shot came. It went through the space where his chest had been a heartbeat earlier. The second shot did not miss. It caught Rosa square through the shoulder as she turned her body between him and the parking structure's line of sight. Not a leap, not a scream, just a decision made in less than a second, and executed with her whole weight, the way she'd throw herself between any customer and a man with murder in his hands. She hit the marble floor, and the small silver charm on her wrist shattered against the stone, its 2 halves skittering into the candlelight. Alessandro was down beside her before his own men reached the shooter's position, his hands finding the wound, his voice flat and commanding as he called for his security detail, completing, not replacing, what she had already started. She had moved him out of the kill zone. He now moved the entire operation to secure it, barking coordinates to men who scattered toward the parking structure at a dead run. Lorenzo, 3 tables back, had gone the color of the tablecloths. He hadn't expected her. Every family in that room, the ones who mattered, the ones whose silent witness had shaped Alessandro's whole life, watched him fail to react like an innocent man would react. Mia, who had begged to come watch her sister's fancy work event from the coat check with a babysitter's cousin, broke away and ran across the floor before anyone could stop her, dropping to her knees beside Rosa, small hands pressing over her sister's, sobbing. "You said heroes always protect people," and Rosa, blood loud and steady, found enough breath to say the one line that would outlive the whole room. "That's exactly what I did." If you had 1/2 second to decide who mattered more than your own safety, would you already know the answer, the way she did? Alessandro's man had Lorenzo by the collar before the words finished leaving her mouth. 3 weeks later, Casa Fortuna's private room was set for dinner, not business, a fact that would have been unthinkable in that room a season earlier. Rosa sat with her arms still in a sling, laughing at something Mia had said about a frog in her science class, while Alessandro poured water for the table himself, unasked, the way she used to pour it for him. He still didn't say much. He had never been a man of speeches, and the room had learned not to expect one. But when he set the glass in front of her, his fingers found the inside of her wrist for exactly 1 second longer than necessary, and neither of them mentioned it, because neither of them needed to. On the table between them sat a small velvet box. Inside, the silver charm, its shattered halves reassembled by a jeweler who did work most people never learned existed. The seam nearly invisible, except where the candlelight caught it at a certain angle. A hairline scar across silver, not unlike the one across his eyebrow. He didn't give a speech when he handed it to her. He simply set it on the table and let her pick it up herself. Mia, watching the whole thing with the unflinching honesty of an 8-year-old, looked between them and announced, to no one in particular, "You like each other," in the tone of someone reporting a scientific finding. Nobody corrected her. Rosa fastened the mended charm back onto her wrist, and the candlelight caught it exactly the way it had the night this whole story began, except this time, when it spun once and settled, it wasn't a secret anymore. It was witnessed by a room full of people who had learned to see her as something other than the woman who refilled their water, and by one man who had spent 15 years believing that anyone who got close to him became a target, and had watched her run toward the target anyway. Rosa never set out to be seen. She just kept showing up, doing the quiet work of protecting people who never thanked her for it. until the one night it mattered more than her own safety, and the whole room finally understood who had been holding it together all along. Is there someone in your life like that? Someone who protects everyone around them and rarely gets protected in return? Have you ever been the one who noticed the danger before anyone else did and had to decide whether to speak up or stay quiet? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story moved you, subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper.